Hello, and welcome to Unit 3 on Cognitive Linguistics. The bulk of this video is really a reading guide for the Vivian Evans required reading, which is a great introduction to cognitive linguistics. Now, you might want to do this interactively because I'm just kind of talking you through the points that he explains in his introductory article to cognitive linguistics. So feel free to stop the video, do a bit of reading, or if you want to watch the whole video and then do some reading, you can. The PowerPoint is in our Google Drive folder. So, cognitive linguistics has two main commitments. One is obviously the cognitive commitment, and that is that principles of linguistic structure should reflect what is known about human cognition from other cognitive and brain sciences, things from psychology, artificial intelligence, neuroscience, philosophy. So the cognitive commitment asserts that the models of language proposed should reflect what is known about the human mind and brain. And then this is a dig at Chomsky, rather than purely aesthetic dictates, such as the use of particular kinds of formalisms or economy of representation. Remember from the end of Unit 2 that Chomsky's looking for that minimalist program where he's trying to get everything down to its very bare structure. Cognitive linguistics, like systemic functional linguistics, embraces the complexity of language. So this suggests that the sequential derivation of syntactic structures that violate time constraints provided by actual human language processing should be rejected. So, remember we saw passivization in from generative grammar in Unit 2, where there were several steps that are involved for arriving at that passive suffix structure from an active deep structure. Now, to be fair to Chomsky, those derivations he suggested were part of an abstract model of what's in our brain. He wasn't saying that it was the real-time operations that we go through, right, when we create a passive voice utterance. So, he's just showing those structural relationships between different sentence forms that is in our grammatical competence in our brain. And it may be unconscious, right? The second commitment is the generalization commitment. That's a commitment to openly investigating how the various aspects of linguistic knowledge emerge from a common set of human cognitive abilities upon which they draw. So remember, Chomsky has this idea that we have a specialized part of our mind and a module in our brains that is specific to language. And cognitive linguists see our whole brain, right, as what we draw on in creating, using, understanding language. So they give the example of a prototype effect. When we look at the world, we divide the world into different types. We categorize the worlds. And in lexical semantics, a robin is a better example of a bird than a penguin, at least in our culture, because this is the prototype effects, right, are very culturally bound. When we say the word house, depending on your culture, you're going to have a prototype in your mind. And these effects can be seen in other areas of language, so we can generalize these prototype effects to other areas of language, such as morphology. We're very familiar with the past tense. We know the regular, you add the ed. They're less prototypical. The irregular strong verbs, for example, or the verbs that end in en. Cognitive linguists note that when children overgeneralize, what they're doing is they're extending from the prototype, the one that they hear most. Syntax, we can also generalize the prototype effect to syntax. Some sentence constructions are more representative of a syntactic category than others. So we can think about the English transitive construction, where an agent acts on a patient, or an actor in a goal in systemic functional terms, in a physical volitional action. So for example, the boy kicked the ball is more prototypical than an abstract or metaphorical transitivity, such as the news shocked me or she gave him a headache. It's not like she took a headache and gave it to him, right? They still fit the transitive category, but they're less central and they're stretching that prototypical agent patient pattern. Now, these two primary commitments, the cognitive and the generalization commitment, lead to 5 theses, and we'll look at each one of these. The first is the thesis of embodied cognition, and that is our understanding of reality is shaped by the kinds of bodies and senses that we have. We experience the world in ways that are specific to our species and even to each individual. Now, the example I included here, the embodiment of the narrative world, there in the distance stood a figure. Now this would be a more prototypical, right, kind of figure standing in the distance, just a stick figure, but actually the writer probably is seeing something, right, when he's writing that, and the reader is going to reconstruct that in their narrative world because our bodies are that's the way we think, right? We think through our senses. Now, the thesis of embodied cognition has two parts, embodied experience and grounded cognition. So the thesis of embodied experience is that reality is shaped by our species-specific and individual bodily makeup, our senses, our neuroanatomy, etc. So different bodies will experience reality differently. So Evans gives the example human versus color vision, right? That birds see in different ways than humans because of the way that their bodies can handle color. But there are also individual variations. For example, handedness, if you're left-handed or right-handed, any kind of disability will obviously influence the way you perceive the world, the way you evaluate the world, the way you experience the world. The second part of the thesis of embodied cognition is grounded cognition. So concepts are actually reactivations or simulations of sensory, motor, bodily, and emotional states. So, for example, when you hear the word kick, you just don't think, oh, kick, and you're seeing the dictionary definition, right? When you read it or hear it, it reactivates part of the motor system that's actually involved in leg movement, along with those sensory memories of maybe force, balance, maybe even the feel of the impact. And this reactivation or simulation draws on your past embodied experiences of actually kicking something, even if you're just reading the word and not physically moving. So that's an example of motor simulation and grounded cognition. There's sensory simulation when you read freshly baked bread, right? Your brain reactivates sensory patterns from past experience, like smell, maybe warmth of the bread, maybe the sound of the crust cracking. So those traces make that concept vivid for you even when the bread isn't in the room, right? Motor simulation, we've seen that with kick. Here's another example. She turned the doorknob. You know, you can, those motor areas are activated when you read the word or hear the word. Emotional, he lost his best friend. If you read that or you hear somebody say that, it triggers our emotional brain circuits related to grief or sadness based on our own memories of losses that we've experienced, even if it's a fictional story, right? So that's a grounded cognition. It's grounded in experience. Related to this, which Evans includes later in his article, so in pages 135, 136, is conceptual metaphor. So cognitive linguists study language by taking seriously the way language manifests that embodied conceptual structure. And so when it's something abstract, we draw on a more concrete experience. So, for example, the conceptual structure of time is often structured, right, in terms of the domain of space. Christmas is approaching, right? So something's coming nearer, time, you know, oh, it's almost time for us to go. The time is coming nearer. States are often structured in terms of locations in space. So she is in love. Okay. So that's a notion of conceptual metaphor. The second thesis is that of encyclopedic, semantics. So the meanings we store in our mental dictionary are connected with all of the background experience we have about the world. So this creates a link between language and thought. So the meanings in our language system are linked to ideas and concepts in our mind. Now, different theories see this link differently. This is even within cognitive linguistics. It's not too important, but Evans mentions it, that Langanker says that they're basically the same thing. Meaning in language is the concept in your mind, where Evans himself said they're different, but they're connected. So the language meaning acts like a gateway to certain parts of your broader knowledge. As I said, that's not important for our purposes. The important thing that is encyclopedic semantic means that knowing a word's meaning is like opening a door to all of the knowledge and associations you have about that word, not just knowing what it points to in the world. The third thesis is the symbolic thesis, and this is really critical for language teaching. So in cognitive linguistics, there's always this form, meaning, pairing. So grammar is actually made up of symbolic units, pairings of form and meaning. And units range from the lexical to the grammatical. Okay, what does that mean? Well, we connect a meaning to a morpheme like dis, as in disassociate, disappoint. We associate it to words. We associate meaning to idioms, but we also associate meaning to grammatical structures, group and sentence level constructions. So, for example, prepositional phrases, right, combine form and meaning. Now, Adele Goldberg, and there's an article by her in the supplementary readings folder, writes about ditransitive constructions. For example, John baked Sally a cake. Remember, we saw somebody baking a cake in Unit 2, but she said this form, subject, verb, NP1, NP2, is connected to a meaning, which is X causes Y to receive Z. So constructions are actually templates with schematic form plus meaning. Now you might be wondering at this point, well, is there any difference between generative grammar and cognitive grammar, such as Goldberg's constructions? Well, yes, because in phrase structure grammar or in Chomskyan grammar, the focus is really only on the structure, on the syntax, not on the semantic. So these rules, S is NP VP, VP is VNP NP, are really only focused on the form. The meaning, it then comes in after you attach the lexical items to the forms, but they're not connected. So the lexicon and the grammar are in separate modules in phrase structure grammar, Chomskyan grammar. Really, grammar is about these abstract patterns and their competence, then we insert words into them. Where for Goldberg, they're form meaning pairings. Okay, so that subject verb NP1, NP2 actually means X causes Y to receive Z. So semantics is part of the construction itself. So that creates in cognitive grammar, cognitive linguistics, a continuum. We'll be seeing that also in systemic functional linguistics, from the lexicon to the grammar. So it's just all form meaning pairings. The smallest would be a morpheme, and the largest would be these constructions that where you have a verb that takes these arguments around it to create a certain meaning. And we learn these by using them over and over. Now, the fourth thesis is meaning as conceptualization. So language understanding is the interaction of the semantic or linguistic and the conceptual and cognitive structures. So this goes beyond simple compositionality, where you have the structure and then you just slot words in. It involves higher order, often non linguistic cognitive processes like visual processing, background knowledge. So, meaning can include non linguistic simulations. Remember that kicking, right, or grasping from perception, action, and emotion. So, meaning is not just linguistic, it's the whole mental representation we construct from language plus our embodied and world knowledge. I mean, this is kind of a metaphor, maybe, where you have a script and then that conceptualization actually leads to the performance, which is embodied. And it involves much more than just what's on the page, right? And five, the usage based thesis. So our mental grammar is an abstraction of symbolic units from actual language use, from usage events. There's no separation in cognitive linguistics between knowing a language and using it because knowledge emerges from use. So there isn't that idea of, this underlying competence and performance which is separate. No, knowing a language and using it are parts of the same coin, right? So, language use, you use language, you abstract away from it, you start making these schemes, uh, John baked Sally a cake. Uh, Sally gave Susan a piece of the cake, that you start seeing these schemas of language that have meaning attached to them. And then that creates our mental grammar, these symbolic units or constructions, and then that shapes our future language use, and then it keeps feeding back in. Now, this usage based thesis contrasts with Chomsky's poverty of the stimulus because cognitive linguists argue that the environment is rich with many social linguistic and statistical cues. And so our learning mechanisms, even for babies, right? Their domain general abilities, our pattern recognition. And there's been a lot of work done on pattern recognition, for example, of phonemes when babies are learning language. Intention reading, we can read people's emotions and intentions. Statistical learning is connected to pattern recognition. You see something so many times, you're like, okay, that structure has that meaning. And that creates these symbolic units, these mental routines that are these form meaning pairings. And the more frequently we see forms, they become more salient. They're stronger cognitive routines. So, they're more familiar to us and we can use them more frequently. They shape our grammar more than rare forms do. And grammar reflects redundancy. So, there is redundancy in our grammar, the repetition across certain kinds of patterns because it mirrors real usage patterns. Now, something that Evans doesn't write about in this article, but it's very important in cognitive linguistics, are image schemas. So, an image schema is a recurring embodied mental pattern derived from our sensory motor experience that we use to structure and understand concepts, including abstract concepts. So, we know what's up and we know what's down, right? Um, and we can map a conceptual metaphor onto that image schema for whatever good is up and bad is down. Interestingly, I mentioned handedness earlier. I've seen an article that suggests that, we're right handed. People often see left handedness as something sinister, right? There are languages where siniestra, I think it's Italian, actually means left handed, right? Um, well, and in Spanish, people talk about tiene mano izquierda, what does that mean? Is that something good or is it devious? But anyway, that left-handed people see left as good. Okay, so, again, these embodied experiences lead us to think in abstract ways according to ways that we can talk about concrete experience, right? So again, it's a recurring embodied mental pattern derived from our sensory and motor experiences. So, cognitive linguists talk about source and target domains for metaphors. So we can take a source domain like a journey and map it onto an abstract domain like love, where lovers um, are in relationships, right? And relationships change, travel, move. We have setbacks in relationships, and we often set goals in our relationships, okay? Um, and going back to image schemas, and this is from another reading. It's the second required reading, uh, the Giovanelli article, which is one on applying cognitive linguistics in the English classroom. That is an L1 classroom, but it can also be applied to a second language classroom. So again, image schemas are basic templates for making meaning that arise naturally from the various sensory interactions that we as humans have in our physical environments. He's showing modals, and so it's taking something like must, that it draws on this image schema of force, okay, and restriction would be an image schema of something that's not allowing you to do something. And so if you're lifting a restriction, oh, you may go, okay? That it draws on these embodied experiences. So we can use these image schemas to teach something like modality. And on the reading guide, there is actually an activity that takes you through Giovanelli's article as well. And finally, I just wanted to mention corpus linguistics. Somebody mentioned this in a post or in the reflection in Unit 1. It is often tied to cognitive linguistics because cognitive linguists looked at real world data. And so they look for patterns of how language is used in real world data. If you're familiar with corpus linguistics, it's a method of linguistic research that uses corpora, these large collections of real world text, and then you might focus on a word, and then you can create this keyword index, right? Where you have the keyword down the middle. So this is from Michaela Malberg. She has a short explanation of corpus linguistics that's in our supplementary reading folder. And so she's looking at the word hand, and then you can look at, well, how is hand being used? Okay, so then you can think about, well, what kind of patterns can I draw from this? Oh, well, we have a couple of hand over, so let's look at what hand over might mean. Okay, so and then you can work with students in the classroom to see these meanings. So there's the further reading has an example lesson on modality. That should say the reading guide has an example lesson on modality. Sorry about that. It's in the reading guide. And so, it's grounded in real use. Corpus data ensures that examples are authentic language. And then, it helps make grammar more meaningful by maybe showing why the forms exist. So you can map to experience. Why hand over? Why handing over power? I mean, you're not really, right? Taking something and handing it over. So, you can think about why the form exists. And then, you can explore with your learners patterns in real data, bridging theory and practice. So I hope you enjoy the reading and exploring of cognitive linguistics and creating an activity with your group. Okay, thank you and see you.